Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members. It's been an interesting experience listening to the discussion on the floor today, and then also in committee. I'm on the State Government and Local Government Finance Committee, and you know, we had the Attorney General's office, Mr. President, there at the committee meeting, and I had a chance to ask him about some things. One of the areas that I'm very concerned about in our government is fraud. We have a state government that seems to be full of fraud, and we have the majority bringing even more government programs that are going to be submitted to and very likely overrun with fraud as well. I'm concerned. My constituents are concerned. I had discussions with the Deputy Attorney General in front of the committee, and I asked him, you know, what are you doing about the Feeding Our Future fraud? We've got, I mean, this is, members, if you haven't been tuning into this, this is an organized crime network, it appears. $250 million of the taxpayers' money was essentially stolen, and state government has stood by and acted as if they had nothing to do with it. And it may be as much as $500 million, Mr. President, we don't know, but I asked the Deputy Attorney General, what has your office done, not only to investigate the fraud and the people who perpetrated it directly, but what about our state government? What has government done in order to ameliorate this situation and bring an end to this type of fraud and bring some accountability? Members, we have 35,000 people in this state government. That doesn't include the University of Minnesota. I did some digging myself on this, and the Minnesota Office of Management Budget has a unit that goes in and does training with the different agencies around internal controls and accountability, I think is the name of their unit. And so I was reading their summary of what they were doing to stop fraud in state government. Well, between 2019 and 2020, they had 701 supervisors attend 11 supervisor core sessions in training around modules for internal control pre-work. Another 269 managers attended another 7 manager core sessions in those 2 years. So I don't completely, Mr. President, understand what that represents, but that's 1,000 people in state government that are supposed to help us attack some of this fraud. And then there was another 18,000 or 19,000 people trained in another area, and we hear another 22,000 trained in 2020 in that same area, and we hear the Office of Management Budget crow about how much training they got done. And Mr. President, I also have read some of the training materials myself. And when it comes to this Feeding Our Future fraud, they actually bring up the fact that in the training for the people who attended the training, that they were told, as soon as fraud is evident to you, as soon as it's evident, it's your responsibility as an employee of our state government to report it to the Office of the Legislative Auditor. We have 2 statutes that require that, 2 of them. And in that training, they also tell them the consequences. You know, if you're an employee and you see this fraud and you don't report it, you know, you can be disciplined, you can be relieved of duty, and you could end up in jail. That's in the training materials, Mr. President, of our state government. And so, you know, I'm asking this Deputy Attorney General what he and the Attorney General's office is doing to help this problem, and I hear crickets, I hear a diversion, I hear, you know, I basically was thrown off course by the discussion because the office didn't want to entertain directly the discussion. But as a matter of fact, Mr. President, last fall, I sent a letter to the Office of the Legislative Auditor to ask them, what is it that you have heard from the Minnesota Department of Education that oversees this $500 million of the people's money? And they responded back and said, the Office of Legislative Auditor has no record that the Minnesota Department of Education or Governor Walz notified the OLA about the potential misuse of public money. The OLA found out about it in the newspapers last January, like the rest of us did. So members, like Senator Lucero, Mr. President, I am frustrated with the Office of the Attorney General. Not to mention that there's no pursuit of feeding our future fraud, there's no pursuit of the Department of Education, which somebody in that department should lose their job. Maybe multiple people in the right type of situation should lose their job, because under their noses, millions and millions and millions, $500 million left the barn, and probably at least half of that was wasted and spent fraudulently. So, Mr. President, I also was around, as everybody else was, in the summer of 2020 when they burned down Minneapolis. Rioters burned down our biggest city, and our government's response was horrible. I didn't see leadership from the Attorney General's office. I certainly didn't see it from the Chief Executive's office. And certainly the mayor of Minneapolis is suspect as well. But we have to start bringing back safety to our state again. If we don't do that, we as legislators are as guilty as anybody else. We are the ones that are responsible, as well as Attorney General Ellison, the governor, and others. And that's why we're here today. We're trying to bring forward legislation that will make our state a better and safer place. I'd like to offer an amendment to Senate File 33, the A16 amendment, Mr. President.
Senator Drazkowski offers the A16 amendment. At the appropriate time, the Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Drazkowski moves to amend Senate File number 33 as follows. Page 1, line 8, delete everything after general. This is the A16 amendment.
Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to request a roll call on the amendment to the amendment and to the underlying amendment.
Senator Friends has requested a roll call vote. Roll call has been requested. Roll call granted. Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do not have an amendment to the amendment, but simply this singular amendment. And members, what this amendment does is that it directs the Attorney General with this money that is appropriated in the bill that's before us, Senate File 33, that he go forward and develop a program. I call it the Make Minneapolis Safe Again program, to prevent riots, mass destruction of the public and private property, and ensure that individuals who make our biggest city unsafe are held accountable. That's the amendment, to bring safety to our biggest city. Mr. President, people are fleeing Minneapolis. I can't tell you how many people that I knocked on their door in my district over the last election that told me, they said, Steve, you know what? I used to go to Minneapolis all the time. We won't even go there anymore. We go to the dinner theater. We go there for a ball game. We go there for the other cultural activities that it offers. And they aren't going there anymore. People are fleeing our biggest city, and that's because the people that are supposed to keep us safe, making the decisions, and among them, on the top of the list, is the Attorney General's office. And I agree with Senator Lucero. I think people in our state have lost confidence in this Attorney General because he is not holding people accountable when they violate other people's safety and their freedoms. And what this amendment does is helps the Attorney General out with this particular appropriation and says, Attorney General, let's make sure these types of riots never happen again. If you see them, you need to hold them accountable and prosecute them. Prosecute them to the extent of the law so that we can bring back a semblance of order and safety to our state again. Thank you, Mr. President.
Roll call has been requested and